tonight's speaker, Terry Boardman.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
At the back, all right?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. It's nice to be with you again, and thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's a real cold one up here, just like it is down. Perhaps a bit colder, actually, up here than where I'm from, in Birmingham, although you can probably tell from my accent I'm actually originally from Birmingham. But I've lived there since the 80s, so that's where I've come from. Just southwest of Birmingham. Between Birmingham and the Archers in Worcestershire. A small place called Stourbridge. That's where I've come from today.
So the roads are not too bad then?
Well, I came on the train actually.
Oh, right.
No problems on the train actually, no. It's good. So, thank you very much for coming out tonight. I hope you'll think at least something has been stimulating for you to hear, even though some of the things will be a bit weird. I'd just like to present you tonight with some ideas which you might not have come across before in relation to this whole theme of so-called 666, Antichrist, Aquarius, and all the rest of it. It's a little bit of a misnomer, the title, and it's got Antichrist there, but I shall not actually be saying a lot about the Antichrist. What I want to really talk about is the so-called beast. You know, there are 3 beasts in the book of Revelation. And I want to be talking about particularly this one, the one with the 2 horns, yeah? And what that particular beast, but if I'd put, is ours the Age of Aquarius or beast, then that might have been a bit misleading, yeah? So I thought, well, Antichrist people have perhaps a little bit more of an image of that. But in fact, as far as Antichrist goes, those of you who may be familiar with the book of Revelation will know that the Antichrist doesn't actually come up very much in the New Testament, only I think 4 times in, not in the Revelation of St. John, but in the letters of St. John, and also longer time in St. Paul's letters to the Thessalonians. St. Paul doesn't use the word Antichrist there, but St. John does. But it's not that I'm going to be particularly focusing on today. But before I get into that, I'd just like to share with you something. For those of you who came in May, and if you did, thank you very much, when I was talking about 2012. Because there's been an interesting development since I was here about 2012, which I'd just like to share with you before we get into this question of the Aquarius and the Antichrist, which I think is actually related to the whole 2012 thing in various ways. And it's this. I shared with you in May when I was here that the date of 2012, scholars figured out back at the end of the 19th century that the Mayan calendar date of 2012 corresponds to our date of 1897. And that was confirmed in the 1950s by Mayan, when I say scholars, I mean bona fide, so-called bona fide scholars, yeah? University people. They confirmed in the 1950s that that was in fact the date. 2012 was the end of the so-called 13th Baktun period of the Mayan calendar. And so since the 1950s, all the Mayan, what I would call the Mayan ideologists, people like Jose Arguelles, Carl Johan Calderman, and John Major Jenkins, these guys are all assuming that that date is the correct one based on these scholars' research. But, surprise, surprise, and this is how it often goes these days, just this summer, this is what I found out only a few weeks ago, this gentleman, Gerardo Aldana, University of California, Santa Barbara, professor of Chicano and Chicano studies, that's Central American studies, he's produced a book called Calendars and Years, Astronomy and Time in the Ancient Medieval World. And to cut it very short, because I don't want to spend too much on this, just to communicate this to you, you can check it out yourself. Obviously, everything I'm saying you can check out yourself, yeah, on the internet. But what he's basically done is he's really dug into the astronomical data which are underpinning the scholars' agreement of the 1950s. And he's found that this astronomical data is in fact not reliable. So he's come to the conclusion that this date of 2012 is between 50 and 100 years out. Either that means either 50 or 100 years too early, or 50 or 100 years too late. It's not accurate, according to him. Now, I'm not in a position now, as I say, I only found this out a few weeks ago, to say whether this is correct or not. For sure, we can expect there'll be a lot of debate and argument in the 2012 community about this latest finding. But I thought I would just sort of share that with you because that's quite interesting in itself. And obviously, if it is correct, it threatens to pull the rug under a lot of the 2012 debate that's been going on. Okay. Right, somebody who's been a big interest and influence on my life, Rudolf Steiner, Austrian spiritual scientist of 100 years ago, he said this in 1924. In the course of the 20th century, when the first century after the close of the Kali Yuga has ended, Kali Yuga, that's a 5,000-year period of what you might call the Age of Darkness, also known as that by the Hindus, the Indians, he said humanity will either stand, that's now, 2000, at the grave of all civilization, or at the beginning of that age when, in the souls of human beings who unite intelligence with spirituality in their hearts, notice spirituality, not religion, Archangel Michael's battle will be fought out to victory. For him, Archangel Michael was a spiritual reality. And he felt that this time that we're going to be living in at the end of the 20th century is a real crux, crucial time. Not for the reasons that 2012 would say, obviously, but a crucial time. We'll either stand at the grave of all civilization. We stand at the grave. That doesn't mean we're in the grave, but we're standing at the grave. In other words, we might be about to get into it, as it were, or we might be pushed into it, or we might be shoveled into it, but we'll be standing on the edge. Or we'll be at that point where we can look more hopefully at the possibility of pulling back from this edge and actually coming to some sort of victorious conclusion against the forces that are threatening us. This was how he saw the crucial importance of the end of the 20th century. And we can see that some of our contemporaries now clearly agree with him. Because I think it's not surprising, or it's interesting, that exactly around the millennium you got these two trilogies came out, right? Lord of the Rings and the Matrix trilogy. And from two completely different perspectives. One you could say from an ancient historical perspective, from the Dark Ages, and another from a futuristic perspective. They both focus on something which they see is threatening humanity. What is this? They both see, I would suggest, that there is a power emerging in the modern world. They sense this power. And this power is a power which is seeking absolute control over every aspect of our lives. I think perhaps there might be many people in this room who think, yeah, we can recognize that. Tolkien's story, of course, he started writing that during the Second World War and finished it in the early 1950s. So he could clearly see the shadows that were threatening humanity in the 1930s. Hitler, Stalin, what was coming from Japan, what was coming from Italy, and also, in a certain sense, what was coming from America. And many of the aspects of those times, the 1930s, that we'll see later on, are also threatening us today in an intensified way. It's just that what happened in the 1930s was really compact and concentrated. And what's happening now is a bit more stretched out, so to speak. But it's just interesting that from these two different perspectives, some of our contemporaries saw this phenomenon happening. Of course you can say, oh, that's just art. That's just entertainment. Personally, I would beg to differ. I think these two films are really important symptoms of something that is going on in our times. Okay, now Aquarius. Because this is a big question, yeah? And it's something which underpins the 2012 phenomenon. It's something which has underpinned a lot of the New Age I can see some faces here in the audience who will obviously remember the song Aquarius from the musical Hair back in, when was it, 1969?
I was too young.
Yeah, you were too young, Albert says he was too young. I wasn't too young, Albert, I remember it pretty well. And you remember it said, when the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars. And that's all we were given, astrologically speaking. And on the basis of that, we were told, it's the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. But that was the astrological information that we were given there. The problem with that is, of course, that the moon is in the 7th house every 24 hours, and that the alignments between Jupiter and Mars are not exactly infrequent. But nevertheless, the song kind of sank into people's subconscious, and it influenced many people. And as recently as the 14th of February 2009, you'll find YouTube videos of New Agers saying the Age of Aquarius began, not in 1969, but on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, 2009. So did it actually begin then? When did the Age of Aquarius begin? And why is it important to know this? Why is it important to be sure? Well, for one thing, as I said, the change, so-called, from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius is something that underpins a lot of the analysis of what's going on today. Now, unfortunately, these little video clips which I wanted to show you are not going to work because, never mind, it's not that important. Let me try now just to say why I think it's quite easy, in fact, to say why we are not, in fact, in the Age of Aquarius, and why we will not be in the Age of Aquarius for quite a long time. The basis of our astrology, which we use in the West, goes back to Babylonia or Chaldea. And again, as I said, you can check all of this out for yourselves. But the Babylonians, what they did was, in addition to setting up a zodiac of 12 equal signs, not unequal signs, as you sometimes get in some astrologers use, which are often based on the physical size of the constellations, today, which is a rather materialistic observation. The Babylonians didn't think like that. They felt that these 12 star systems are equal spiritual powers, with equal spiritual powers. So they made them, the constellations, equal. Even though they do not, the boundaries, the 30-degree boundaries which they gave, do not actually correspond to the physical size of the constellations in the heavens. So, they created a zodiac of 12 equal-sized signs, which we know today. And this was based on these 4 stars. Starting with the axis, I'll just skip to the next one so it's a bit clearer. Starting with the axis of Aldebaran, this one, in Taurus, and Antares in Scorpio. These 2 star systems. They took that as their axis. And then on the other side, they saw the star Regulus in the heart of the lion, and the star Fomalhaut in Aquarius. And these 4 stars, they used as the cardinal points of this 12-fold zodiac. And then they arranged 2 other signs on either side of those 4. So we get 12. But these are the 4 upon which they based them. And they placed these 4 star systems in the middle of these constellations. So you've got 30 degrees, they placed these 4 stars at 15 degrees each. Now, are we aware of what the spring point is? If I say spring point, the spring point are the equinoxes. You've got the 2 times of spring and autumn when the day and the night are the same length, yeah? Is that okay with everybody, right?
21st of September, March.
Right. So the day and night are the same length on these days. And one can observe that this point, when the day and the night are the same length, changes gradually over time, yeah? And it changes, it moves 1 degree every 72 years. 72, interesting number. So it changes 1 degree every 72 years. So in 30 degrees, it will change 2,160 years. And that is the length of time it takes for the sun to pass, or rather the spring point, I should say, to pass through one sign of the zodiac. Are you with me? So that means that now, today, in our year, for example, when we look on March 21st, when the day and night are equal, and if we were to look towards the sun, if we could see behind the sun, we would see the constellation Pisces, astronomically. Okay? And there's still 5 to 5.5 degrees of Pisces left to go. And only when those 5.5 degrees have gone do we enter the sign of Pisces. Will the spring point be in the sign of Pisces? Is that okay, everybody? Sorry, in the sign of Aquarius, thank you. In the sign of Aquarius, yeah? So we have 5 to 5.5 degrees left to go of Pisces. This is an observable physical phenomenon. Anybody can see this. So you can easily calculate, if it takes 72 degrees to move 1 degree, when do we enter the sign of Aquarius? We enter the sign of Aquarius in approximately, astronomically speaking, 2375. The year 2375. 2370s. So that's not tomorrow. It's not 2009. It's sometime in the future yet. Astronomically speaking, of course, that's a relatively short time, yeah? In an astronomical framework. But in terms of human culture and history, it's still a fairly long period of time. A lot can happen in the next 300 years, for example. However, there's more to it than that. And it has to do with this. This is called the Venus pentagram. 5 times the Venus and the Sun meet in the heavens, as seen from the Earth. It's an apparent phenomenon. So you know there's something called conjunctions. Those of you who are interested in astrology, when the heavenly bodies are seen, as it were, to meet in the heavens, yeah, from the Earth's perspective. This is called a conjunction. They're close together, within an orb, within about, say, well, astrologers sometimes disagree about how big the conjunction is, but let's say 5 degrees. Close together, close in the sky. And every 8 years, there are 5 of these meetings, and they trace out a very beautiful 5-pointed star, which is called the Venus pentagram. So that means you get this form, meeting here, then here, then here, then here, then here, then here. And because after the 6th meeting it doesn't come back to the same place, then the whole thing shifts. So can you see in your mind's eye that this entire form will rotate as a mental phenomenon almost, yeah? The entire form will rotate through the zodiac, and we can calculate that this will take exactly 1199 years for it to do so. 1200 years. Yeah? Is that clear? Yeah? So 5 meetings in 8 years, and then the whole thing rotates. So you could also imagine how after 600 years, this Venus pentagram will be upside down, so to speak. Yeah? And 1200 years. Now this is where the interesting point comes. Because if we look at human culture and human history, we will find that the change of these astrological ages or epochs do not actually follow, for our human dimension, do not actually follow what's going on up there in the heavens. They are, as it were, stepped down like a kind of transformer by this phenomenon. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Mayans will know that the Mayans were very keen observers of Venus. And why? Because Venus, not only is it beautiful, it's harmonious, its movements are extremely harmonious and extremely regular. So it's an excellent astronomical clock, so to speak. Mercury, the conjunctions of Mercury and the Sun trace out a 6-pointed star, but that's kind of skew with. And it doesn't create such a nice form in the heavens, yeah? This, on the contrary, does. So the Mayans were interested in Venus for its harmonious and regular movements. And so we can see that, if you look at the events of history, that the new ages, as they come one by one, Age of Pisces, Age of Aquarius, and so on, they actually occur 1200 years after the astronomical changes happened in the heavens.